baseball and stuff with him, and I'm standing there with one of his friends. Actually, was one of my daughter's friends. Did you think when you were a percussionist in Little League, we'd be at a championship someday? Yeah, I said, I don't know. You guys played since you were, they were one of the first classes that started out in Batavia all the way through until they were senior, until they were in varsity. It's like, this is really cool. Well, then they really knew each other. And I think that still holds true.
But now I'm curious if this was
ready. I'd like to call to order the special committee of the whole meeting for November 3rd, 2025. First item on our agenda tonight is roll call.
Raza? Here. Lancy?
Here.
Beck? Here. Millay?
Here.
Malone?
Here.
Wolf?
Here.
Solfa?
Here.
Barron? Here. Lehman?
Here.
Lohman?
Here.
Pieper?
Here.
Fehrenbach?
Here.
Thank you. Anderson?
Here.
White?
Here.
14 present, no absent.
Thank you. Second is a reminder to please speak into the microphone for anybody that comes up to use the podium. So we get it on the recording for BATV. Item 3 is items to be removed, added, or changed. Do we have anything? We're fine with what's there. Good. Item 4 is matters from the public for items not on the agenda. Didn't have any earlier, probably don't have any now. Okay, then we'll go right into regular agenda, which is item 5.1, discussion on housing. Who is starting this? Since there was no memos or anything, I have no idea what.
Sure, I had asked for it to be on the retreat agenda because I wanted to continue conversations. I know it's been brought up many times over the past 6 years that I've been on council, usually in relation to actual housing projects, where we've discussed the need for affordable housing here in the city of Batavia, the affordability gap that is present nationwide, not just in Batavia. The startling statistic that there's 120 unhoused children in our school district right now. The problem is big and complex, and I don't expect that we will solve any of the world's big problems here tonight. But I do think that there are methods out there being proposed, being tested, or being successful in other areas of the country that are worthy of a discussion to at least see if they would help folks in Batavia either stay in their homes or stay in town, or folks that want to move to Batavia, folks that want to move back to Batavia, folks that want to move out of their parents' home in Batavia, have the housing stock available to them. I don't think we've seen a lot of starter homes built here in Batavia in the last 50 years. We've built up, we've become more affluent. We're definitely missing a segment of the housing stock that would be more affordable and accessible to certain people. I use the example a lot of my own family here in town that for my grandparents, they moved to East Wilson Street in the late 40s. And quickly subdivided their home, put an apartment up on top. And my grandpa died young. He died in the 60s. My grandma, widow with 4 kids, was able to stay in her home until in the 90s, early 2000s, because she had the rental income from the unit up above, had the same tenant for years and years. Actually, she's still there. I went by and I saw her outside. If that hadn't been, and it would be absolutely illegal for her to do that in that neighborhood today. So that option is not afforded to folks today. So I just see that as housing stability, housing consistency plays such a huge role. And I know that it's played a huge role in my life that we've been able to stay here generation over generation. I did have a resident reach out to me last year, recently, single mom, looking to stay in her home, keep her kids in the Batavia schools, in their elementary school, hoping to subdivide her home so she could stay in it and afford to stay. And of course, it was illegal for her to do that. So I bring up those stories. I have three kind of policy levers that I would love to discuss, one of them being the ability to subdivide your home and rent out a portion of your home. The other one would be accessory dwelling units, ADUs. And the third one, I wrote it down, is having a set of approved building plans for triplexes, or fourplexes, sixplexes, whatever we decide, having a pre-approved set of plans that a developer could pick up and run with quickly, easily in approved districts and, land constraints and whatnot. So those are my 3 things that I would love to push forward. We don't have to push them all forward tonight, but that's my spiel.
Kevin?
Yeah, I'm really excited to have this discussion. It's one of the reasons that I really wanted to be part of council here. And I think I agree, both in principle and in practice, and a lot of what Alderwoman Beck shared there. I think big picture wise, just a few thoughts that I'm having on it. First, I don't want to focus just on affordable housing. I think all housing, we can kind of do a little bit more to encourage housing infill development, different types of developments in different zones in a way that sort of builds our housing stock. And the goal that I'm approaching this as is that more housing typically means either stable or lower prices, right? Sort of supply-demand curve. The more supply you have, the lower the prices will go. And all the reasons that Alderwoman Beck just shared, for folks just coming out of college, we want to find places for them to live. I happen to work in the divorce courtroom, and I know that when people split, a huge challenge is finding new housing. I'm oftentimes writing parenting plans when 2 people who loathe each other are still staying in the same home. They haven't figured out how to divide the assets. One of them has the income, the other one doesn't, and affordable housing is a huge part of it when you don't yet know what your income will be or whatever the case is. All those reasons, right? More housing that is accessible and affordable, and not just affordable in the traditional sense, but affordable in sort of a market rate sense, makes a whole lot of sense. And one thing we can do as a city council is we can look at our zoning, we can look at how we incentivize and disincentivize different types of housing in different areas. One thing that I've thought a lot about are ADUs, these alternative dwelling units. Think of that like a granny flat in the back. Maybe you put another unit on top of your garage that you could rent out, something of that sort. I really like that idea because it feels like low-hanging fruit. It feels like something that we can pretty quickly implement. It's not going to radically change our neighborhoods. It's probably not going to solve the housing crisis, but it is one small step that we can take. Right now, we do allow them in our R1Ms and our R1Hs. We do not currently allow them in the R1L, which is kind of our single-family area. I think that'd be a pretty simple and quick solution. Of course, your ADU would still have to abide by the zoning codes, right? You wouldn't be able to put up a shack and put somebody in it. You'd still need to make sure that it hits the fire code and it has the proper offsets and all that. But I do think that'd be a quick and easy small step that we can take. Similarly, I think the duplexes, triplexes, 3 flats, kind of in that range is something that I'd like to at least have a discussion on. Maybe that makes sense in R1L, maybe not. Are there ways we can incentivize it in R1M, medium density? Maybe I'll just switch to the density conversation. But kind of making those easier to jump into. Abby used the word developer, and I might say, to kind of make it more accessible to entry level, newer type developers, people who are kind of testing the waters, who maybe want to build their first small apartment or do some infill there as well. Which then brings us to the third point that Abby brought up. These are all over the internet, right? You can find these 3 things all over your different housing groups that you have, like Strong Towns and so on. But kind of the pre-approved plans, I think the pre-approved plans are a pretty cool idea. The idea being that one of the barriers to building infill stuff is that you got to hire an architect, you got to go in, and then you kind of don't know if, is the zoning commission going to take it, or what am I going to have to do? And you're kind of paying someone every step of the way. If we have a couple plans that you can walk in, pull off the shelf, and then you don't have to be the architect. You can instead hire your contractor and say, look, I know they're going to pass code. I know it's going to be approved. That lowers the cost on the developer side. And on the city side, we get a little bit of control there, right? If we want it to look a certain way and we want it to fit into the neighborhood in a certain way, well, we're the ones who approved it, right? We won't get, an all glass and steel structure in the middle of historic downtown, because we're the ones who made it, right? It kind of scratches both itches in that way. So I find all three of these ideas kind of exciting. I'm talking a lot here, guys, sorry. It's something I care about. And then just the last thing I want to throw out there is longer picture, bigger picture. We do want to, I can't think of a polite way to put this. We have some properties that just aren't being used well. And we've had a lot of discussions back and forth on why that is. Maybe it's landlords, maybe it's interested developers, maybe it's this or that. But I'd love sort of a longer term, bigger picture understanding of, what can we do? Maybe One Washington was the wrong fit for the wrong spot, but we do need development of that type somewhere, somehow in town. And I'd love to get a better understanding of what we can do to help that along, make it a little more inviting, right? Get some of these development, that new spot we have available next to the tin shop, right? I'd love to find ways we can really get that spot to turn into townhomes, mixed use. I don't know, like what is it that's stopping folks from building the One Washington and building on that site and building in these other sites? And that is more of a question than a comment. Thank you. That was a lot. I apologize.
Dustin?
I have even more. So yeah, housing has definitely become an issue. I myself, as a young professional, I know a lot of other young professionals at Fermilab and other facilities who would love to move to our town and simply can't. Whether it's housing or apartments, there are often very few options, and the options there are either heavily dilapidated in the case of some more older homes or simply unaffordable, both of which are very high impedance to younger folks moving in. We're a very desirable town. I think we all agree on that. We all like to be boosters for our town, but we're not seeing the kind of development we need to following. There's a desire to see some more apartment buildings downtown, but speaking with staff and speaking with local developers, there's been a lot of financing options. I'll get into that in a moment here. And it's a case of us trying to figure out how to bridge that gap. And additionally, hopefully emphasizing more infill development rather than development on the edge of town. The mayor has spoken a lot about how we're running out of room in terms of places to expand, with the new forest preserve on the west side of town kind of enclosing us in here a bit, and the other edges of town being completely locked off to us already. We're going to have to find ways to make use of the land we already have and the infrastructure we already have. So this is we can break this kind of down into two categories of housing. We can look at the apartment buildings, and we can look at the sort of smaller scale infill housing. So your missing middle housing especially. Apartment buildings, like we've found, it's been kind of strangely hard to get financing. It seems that developers are kind of preferring communities around us who have more direct transportation access, either through the train lines or through the highways. So that's one sort of difficulty we're facing. And how we can kind of get through to, that financing, I think, is a big challenge. I've wondered if maybe we had better bus access to the train stations, if that could help, but that's a bit of a long shot. One funding mechanism I'm just going to bring up here, and I don't have high expectations for it, but if you've been following the news, the state Congress has passed a sweeping, transit funding and reform package that includes the ability for what will become the North Illinois Transit Agency, or NITA, to actually invest in and even build transit-oriented developments around their major transit stops as a way to help fund the organization going forward, which is a fantastic model that has been used for some of the most successful transit agencies in the world, and even here in America historically in the past. It'd be a long shot if we could maybe look at that as an avenue of funding, if alongside perhaps a higher capacity bus route here in town, kind of a chicken egg problem there. But since they're holding the basket of the chicken and the egg, there's an option there. Couldn't hurt to ask, but I'm not expecting it.
It's still Illinois trying to implement it.
Yeah, it'd be a nice option, especially because those types of systems are most successful in places that don't yet have transit, because then they can capture the suddenly increased land values created by the new transit access. So there's a case for it. I think we've been trying to get one good project here, apartment building wise, to prove ourselves, to show, hey, this can be profitable. But it's a kind of a heavy lift, as we've been seeing, as we've been discussing. I know we're working very hard on trying to get something set up on Route 31 here. Very curious how it's going. I know still very much in discussion stages, more than discussion, but early implementation stages. So things aren't perfectly worked out there. But kind of the fundamental problem of that entire avenue is it is highly dependent on the national financing situation, as well as existing sort of finance, almost like expectations that might not be entirely realistic, broadly speaking. So finance for this kind of housing is very locked in how it does things, and it's very much a one-size-fit-all approach that might not quite fit us yet. So we kind of need to look, instead of necessarily always looking at outside financing for these larger scale apartment buildings, that kind of moves into my next point of missing middle housing. So missing middle housing, for folks who don't know the jargony term there, is housing that is less than your large apartment buildings, your block size apartment buildings, but more than just single family homes. So like's been mentioned, the triplexes and duplexes, row houses, smaller apartment buildings. So that fit maybe a building, sort of like we have in our downtown area already, various types of smaller scale mixed use, that sort of thing. Actually, on regards to duplexes, there are a lot of avenues we could have there. I have a coworker of mine who, much like Abby's, we said grandparents, he bought a duplex here in town, historical duplex, with the purpose of renting out the top level to be able to afford it. So this is very much a avenue of housing affordability that exists today to help get people into homeownership, especially at younger ages. He's actually younger than I am, so there is an option there if we make it more accessible. That was already a grandfathered in duplex, but making that more common throughout town could go a long way. And that's a great example of the smaller scale, locally financeable options we could have. This goes into the idea of incremental development. There are organizations out there that help spur this. It's basically the idea of, we can't get the big outside funding. They're not here in Batavia. They don't know how special this place is. But we do have a lot of people here in town who are excited about our town, but are very intimidated in getting into development. It's a difficult subject. It's a lot to take in all at once because you have to become kind of a jack of all trades very quickly. A lot of, especially in the Midwest and the Rust Belt, towns in this area, in adjacent states at least, have had a decent amount of success developing a local developer ecosystem. So getting folks together who have interest in this, sharing resources, sharing options of who do you call, who's good at this sort of construction project, who's good at this sort of specific task, or who does provide funding locally for this sort of option, and working on creating that sort of self-sustaining system. It has been successfully done in a number of places. I think South Bend has a lot of that right now, and a number of cities in Michigan are also good with that. There exists already the Incremental Development Alliance, who we could maybe reach out to and start developing options here, who they have a lot of experience setting up these exact ecosystems. But there's also just a lot of local groups who are getting into housing, especially affordable housing, that we can continue to work with. There's the Fox River Valley Initiative, who have started a affordable housing development up in Elgin, which I'll actually be visiting this Saturday. They're having an event, and I think folks all around are invited. You can look that up on their website. They have shown interest in also doing something here. I've talked with one of their leaders who I think runs a church over by the West Side Fire Station. So that's an option, try to get some more of that. I know affordable housing, we do also want to be able to achieve market rate housing, but that can be a step towards it by developing our downtown, especially commercial ecosystem, to get a virtuous cycle going. So I think that's certainly a valid route. I've spoken to some folks in the community who are vaguely interested in a community banking initiative. I don't have any further details in that sentence there, but another potential financing option if something like that could get off the ground. I would also recommend, and this would be a bit of a program, maybe putting together a sort of development tabletop charrette. So not an actual full scale, like, we're going to develop this, but maybe tabletop out how doing local developments on maybe some example case properties around town, how that actually games out at an individual level as a part of developing this incremental development ecosystem to not only help expose folks to the development process in a safe, low-risk way, because we're not actually spending money here, we're just kind of gaming out the system with, perhaps working with some of our professionals here in town, developers and, city staff alike, but also to help us as a city recognize the roadblocks we might not realize are there for some of the more challenging properties in town. So just creating these sort of gaming out these, these different developments, I think could be very healthy for us as a community and for developing that sort of mindset. Going into zoning reforms, we spoke last year, I'm not going to relitigate this too much tonight. We did speak last year about the single stair requirement. This is referencing apartment buildings. Right now in apartment buildings, you have to have 2 stairwells for proper fire access and control, which very noble cause. I don't think anybody disagrees with that part of it. That being said, there has been some evidence to suggest a single stair system could be adequate for smaller apartment buildings above so many stories still, while still being safe and providing types of housing that are more amenable to a broader range of people. Right now, apartment buildings are built kind of like hotels, which leads to apartments that are only maybe 1 or 2 bedrooms because you need windows in the bedrooms for it to be up to code, understandably again. That's not very conducive to families, and it creates these very long, narrow apartment style buildings where a smaller apartment building with a single stair, you basically have 4 corner units. You can have a lot more windows, you can have a lot more light access in the rooms, and then you can also support, larger families in an apartment setup, which can be very helpful for families who might not be able to afford or otherwise might not be able to have it a full house. Pew, just this past year, actually released a full report on the safety of single stair requirements. It's an excellent report. It goes into great detail of the pros and cons of this policy in a very neutral way. I can send that to folks if anybody's interested, but it is a very comprehensive and long report looking at everything about the topic and challenges it might have in America. With our other, development codes, our building codes and the like. So that's also a very excellent one. There's also here something I'm going to reference. So Kevin's already mentioned Strong Towns. I'm very involved with that organization, as you may know. They've released a Housing Ready Toolkit, which is a series of instructional guides on things that cities can do to make housing more achievable in towns. Including a list of sort of 6, here's 6 things you can do to make housing more achievable. And these are fairly ambitious. I'm just going to read them out here and not necessarily go into severe detail yet unless we want to have that discussion. So don't have a heart attack yet. Number 1, allowing conversion of single-family homes to duplexes or triplex by right across town in all residential zones. That's existing single-family homes, 2 duplexes or triplexes, which we've already kind of discussed tonight. Permitting ADUs in all residential zones, which Kevin's already brought up. Legalizing starter homes in all residential zones. This is something we're already pretty much checked the box on. We don't have any minimum building size requirements in our residential zones, like you have to have this many square feet of a house. Some places do, which naturally raises the minimum price by quite a bit. So we're pretty good on that one. This one's challenging. Eliminate minimum lot size requirements in existing neighborhoods. So newly platted neighborhoods would still have them in this formulation, but existing neighborhoods, eliminating those requirements to allow subdivision of lots or infill development more easily where it makes sense. And that can be discussed. We don't have the most ridiculous lot size requirements in the world. Like for our higher density single family zones, it's like 5,000 square feet, which is fairly reasonable compared to a lot of places.
4,500.
Oh, it's 4,500 now? I just looked at it before this.
It's 4,500 lot. 45 wide. Oh,
Yeah, we're talking about total area.
Square feet here.
That's fine. And yeah, that's not the most ridiculous. Some places, even then, it'd be 10,000. It's like, okay, that'd be a bit much. This one might ruffle some feathers. Repealing parking mandates for housing. This is one thing I'm not as worried about for single-family homes as is multifamily homes and apartment buildings. Right now, we require for anything above studio 1.5 for a single bedroom, and is it 2 for multi-bedroom, I think?
2 or 2.25.
We could change how we do that, and remember that is what the city mandates. It doesn't prevent developers from still building parking. So if we repealed those mandates. And the last one, this one's really going to scare you guys.
I've already read all of this.
You have read all of this. Okay. Streamlining the approval process so that duplex conversions, backyard cottages, and starter homes could be approved to permit in less than 24 hours. That'd be very, very much a challenge just from a, administrative capacity standpoint. I fully understand that, but it's an aspirational goal. Getting towards that of making it a simple approval process rather than one that requires like extensive approval in, plan commission or the like, at worst, is another option we can do. These are all very very ambitious, but options to make small scale, but widely available development possible. All right, that's what I got.
Hey, Dustin.
Yeah?
This is Jim. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Can you guys hear me over there? Yeah. Hey.
Yeah, can you speak up just a little bit, Jim? You're real low.
I can't. You know what? I'm in my car. Can you hear me?
Okay.
I'm getting close to the mic. I can. Okay. So when it comes to this topic, I'm probably the only person on city council who's actually lived around rental duplexes and what have you in Batavia or on the council. One of the biggest problems we have is that our residential rentals, there's no governance around them at all. And so that opens up the neighborhoods to a lot of exposure. And more importantly, that means these properties have a reputation, which quite frankly can be well deserved in some cases. Mm-hmm. So to walk in and not address that and talk about everything you just said, it's going to sound tone deaf. Is what's going to happen. So we got to be cognizant of Batavia being a town that's developed in fits and starts over the past 100 years. We already have a lot of housing variety and a lot of housing density, whether we acknowledge it or not. And we also have decades of experience with some of this housing, right? So when we say things like, I'm going to get a duplex approved in 24 hours, I mean, that if I'm a homeowner, that sounds almost horrifying, right? Because I don't know who's making the decision. I don't know why it needs to be 24 hours. You know what I mean? So we really got to be prepared for a conversation that is going to acknowledge reality and deal with a lot of people, including me on city council, who have experience around some of these properties, right? So if this is something we really want to tackle, pretty much everything that was just said, we have to acknowledge the lack of governance being an issue as well. Make sense?
Right. And yeah, expanding, especially tenant protection is definitely worthwhile doing, I'd say.
Yeah, it's two sides of the same coin. It's unfair for tenants, it's unfair for neighbors, and it's unfair for other landlords, right? So.
Yeah, the last one was really the only one that scared me because I don't know how you can realistically ever think you could get all of the things, laid out against what restrictions or whatever, requirements we would have on whatever kind of dwelling you're talking about. Because to me, we have to make sure if we expand those possibilities that we at least have good control over that. And if we're going to try and turn it around even in a week, to me, just knowing all of the stuff that goes through community development and the building department,
right?
That's a whole nother department that would have to be added just to handle that.
Yes, I think you're right for conversions, and for conversions, I kind of wonder, you got to get in there, each individual house, especially old homes where you have like an addition that was approved, the other addition tacked on that wasn't approved. I do think for new development, 24 hours is arbitrary.
Right,
It could
it
be a
is.
week, could be a
That
month.
was just what
It's
I
still
was
less than the red tape we're seeing now, which is, we need the red tape. I don't mean it to be derogatory there, but that's where sort of these pre-approved plans might come in. Like if we have something sort of already approved and all we need is sort of a site placement type.
Right, and that would be
review,
the thing where,
we could
okay,
probably do that pretty quick.
you got
right?
15,000 square foot lot, and this is the size building you can
Yeah,
put on it, and
make sure it's-
orientation.
You got your
and
easements
make it much
properly in
easier.
the ground. Just the last thing I just want to quickly say to Jim's point is that, yes, I hear you that some homeowners are going to hear this and be a little put aback, but the more common complaint I hear is how hard it is for people to control their own property than it is for people being afraid of what their neighbor's doing. So I hear more of, why can't I build this thing on my house, or why do I have to go through review for A, B, C, D, versus, oh man, my neighbor might put in this or that. So I hear you, and I don't think it's a concern to be dismissed, but I think the concerns I'm hearing more from my constituents are on the other side, on the control of their own property side. So,
Sam, you had your hand up next.
Yeah, I mean, me personally as a homeowner, yeah, I'm on the side of, that scares me. I think this is without, I mean, we're already stretched from staff perspective. I mean, this would be absolute insanity if you just basically said, okay, everyone build whatever the hell you want on your land, and we'll see what happens. I mean, let's not forget about the people who already live here, who want their property values to go up, right? Not everyone wants the exact same thing. So we need to, people talk about inclusivity and including everybody. Let's include everyone, most importantly, our current constituents. Of course people want to come into this town. We want to make it affordable as possible. I haven't heard anyone, and we've had many discussions at length about this topic. I've yet to hear a number. What is affordable, and how do you get to that number? Because right now, today, you can't build a shack in this town for less than 400 grand. I mean, so who's building these? How are we going to get to a price point that is affordable? What is that price point? Why do you think that that is affordable? And how are we going to get there with no subsidy?
Just real quick, I'll take public comment after we're done discussing this. Were you next, Leah, or Abby?
I do realize this is a discussion and we're kind of talking high level, and so there's going to be things that are discussed tonight that we won't necessarily have the plan or the staff in place or any of that, but I don't want that to hold us back from this brainstorm session or from thinking about future, like what is good for Batavia or the future of Batavia. Basically, this is not a get deep in the weeds kind of a meeting in my mind. So I've heard, this was something I've been thinking a lot about, but it was mentioned by multiple people here about, excuse me, our young professionals and people who have entry-level work, who have college degrees, our educators in Batavia, our firefighters in Batavia, who work here, even people who are on our city staff, but cannot live here because they can't find housing. The mayor often talks about creating housing for seniors who have raised families here and want to find a place to retire, and they're empty nesters, and so creating housing for them. That's great. What about kids who grew up here and now want to stay living here but don't have a place to live? And perhaps they also want to stay and eventually raise a family here. But if they have to leave Batavia to go find housing somewhere else, they might not come back to Batavia. They might go find their new community get settled in there, and then stay there. So we need to be thinking of just the full spectrum of Batavians. And I think, Kevin, you brought this up. There are situations, I know some personally, where people get, their living situation changes, their partners change, and they're trying to stay in the school district that their kids are in. And there's often not housing affordable for a single parent to live in. So I think that that's where I'm coming from today. And I'm talking about how can we make our neighborhoods affordable for these groups of people. And when my family moved here, we had to go find a very old, dilapidated house on the east side of Batavia that was bank owned, because that was the only thing we could afford in Batavia. And thank goodness we were able to make that work, because we really wanted to live here. So, because Nate grew up here. So that's an example. A young person whose family was here, we wanted to be here, and it was a struggle to find anything in this town. So I just, that's my why and my who of this conversation. We might all have different whys for this conversation, but that's where I'm coming at tonight. So.
Abby? Oh.
I spoke already. Tony can go next.
Oh, yeah, okay. This, I'm glad we're having this discussion. This is not something new. As you all know, I ran the building trades program for the high school. We actually explored doing some projects for workforce housing, is what we were calling it. We were talking with the city, the school district, and had 3 local architects come up with some very innovative ideas. That was a difficult time, though. That was shortly after 2008. And
Is that the stuff when Steve Vasilian was?
Yeah, Steve was one.
I was going to bring that up. That was one.
And Lane Allen did
things.
one. We put out a request for proposal, and they all 3 came in. Kluber, they came back with some very interesting ideas. One part of that discussion was also out by where the what's that, between Feast Road and where the water tower was.
The water tower site.
Yeah, exactly. We were exploring that since Habitat has done those houses there. But so I bring this up because it's it's not just affordable housing. It's not about just making things so that would make current residents nervous. I hear what you're saying, Tim, but it's more having firefighters, teachers, police officers that work in this community, live in this community, that's true value. That is, I think, having that. It's also, I'm hopeful this on 25, this is the affordable housing project, there it goes. I was very hopeful for the project at the Campana, but that was obviously shut down. That was right when I got on the council, and that was baptism by fire there. That might have been one of the meetings that was.
Yes, that was probably one of my biggest, one of my worst nightmares, but it was one of the most difficult meetings ever to be part of.
That was, but I bring this up because this isn't something new. We've identified this, so many times over again. So I'm really glad we're having this discussion, and I think thinking outside the box. We were hopeful that One Washington was going to bring a lot of housing stock, but it isn't happening. So we need to try something different. So.
I apologize. Unfortunately, I can't raise my hand on this version of Zoom that I'm on, or else I would. Final point, and then I'll just stay offline. We definitely need more housing. I mean, no argument there. And I personally was hoping that One Washington Place would have gone through, because I was a big fan of it. So don't think I'm coming from that perspective. Where I am coming from is when we start saying things like we're going to convert houses to duplexes and what have you, I mean, people have been in these neighborhoods for a while. You know, they bought a house expecting to live next to a single family or what have you, right? Whatever their environment was. This is coming from a guy whose first house actually was next to a duplex in Batavia. And likely, my wife and I, we had to struggle to get into Batavia. We got a house, we had a rehab, all that good stuff, right? I just want to make sure that we acknowledge we have a gap in governance. There's no doubt regarding residential rental properties. And that's where people's minds are going to go to when we start saying things like we're going to start converting stuff into duplexes or what have you, right? So there's no reason why we can't do both in parallel while we're having this discussion. I just want to make sure we temper what we're saying with, you know, just a well-known history of the town and these types of properties, or some of these types of properties. Thank you.
Abby?
So I am someone who lives in a neighborhood with many converted duplexes, and I grew up in a neighborhood with many converted duplexes. I also lived in the neighborhood that Jim is referring to with duplexes. I also want to make sure that when we have these conversations, and I think we should take each of these issues as separate meetings, so we're discussing just one at a time, that we come at it with data, and we're not fanning the flames of a perception that rental units are bad, renters are to be discouraged or feared. I've had more complaints in my ward about single-family homes, owner-occupied, than I have about any of the duplexes in my neighborhood. So I think we need to come at each of these with some information, and we should seek out some statistics. And from the examples of where these have been implemented across the country, did it make property values go down in places where ADUs were installed? Did it make crime rates go up if it was allowed, you were allowed by right to make a duplex in your home, like, which is actually a state bill that was proposed this year. So soon it might be an Illinois state law that we can do that anyway, and the control will be taken out of our hands to begin with. So I just want to, I wanted to bring up a whole slew of things and throw a whole lot at the dartboard to see what stuck tonight. I would like to have a continued discussion one at a time so that we're not talking at different topics at the same time, that we can just look at them individually in the future. And I want to come with that, armed with that information so that we're not speaking in hypotheticals or in perception. We're speaking to real facts and real history.
Yeah, I'd just like to clarify that my statement had nothing to do with renters, and it had to do with renting and the property values. That was what was meant by my statement.
Yeah, and I think, you know, Tim, I think you're right in a lot of ways, right? We do want to keep in mind that current owners are folks that we want to keep in mind. We want them to be part of our discussions and part of our solutions moving forward. Another question was sort of what is, you know, what are we aiming for in terms of affordability? And I think that's, I don't view that as our role as council. What I view our role as council is kind of opening up the market to allow the market to drive things a little bit more than we currently do. And how we do that is by giving some rights back to property owners. We allow the property owners to decide, do I want to live in a single family home, or do I want to put a second unit up in the attic, right, for grandma to live in? And we need to make sure that it's up to code. We need to make sure that it's not going to, you know, damage our water supplies, and we have the right electricity hookups, right? We still need to follow code, but sort of give that land use back to the people who own the land and pull some of the restrictions off within limits, right? And that's the discussion I think I'm trying to have, and some of the discussion and where I think we're at. If I had a magic wand, I would say that a good target for something that's affordable would be, you know, what someone can afford on $52,000 a year, which happens to be the starting salary of a BPSU
700.
teacher. You know,
$700 for the kid.
yeah,
That was
right?
me.
That's not a ton of money, right? And I think if we open up some possibilities there, we can get some options.
In Batavia
Yeah.
anymore.
Oh, no.
Place I rented for
Without
$700.
Oh, hold on a second.
It's $1,200 now.
Yeah, and that's where the market has taken things, and a lot of that is supply and demand. But again, like, that's not what we do as council. We don't set housing prices. We don't decide what it's going to be. But I think speaking back to, if I can get a new teacher at BPS to live in town, I would know then that I did a little bit of what I was aiming to do. And maybe they have to be married. Okay. So maybe then plus a part-time salary. I don't know. But like 52 is kind of what I would hope a measure of success might be.
Alice?
I wanted to chime in here as somebody that's in the school system that speaks to teachers and is in that community. I hear a lot about that, the educators, and yes, I've had numerous conversations with educators who work here and wish they could live here. Housing stock is always an issue that's brought up here in council and how we don't have it. And when thinking about this issue, going back to the strategic plan, right? The things that were mentioned tonight with the ADUs as an option, the duplex, the triplex as options, 3 flats, having plans in place. To me, it makes sense to support these 3 things because in doing so, it would increase the housing supply. We'd have more housing options. It would support multi-generational living. And me, as an example, a few years ago, my mom was going through some life changes, and she came to Batavia, worked here, but she couldn't find anything affordable. Like Jen mentioned, $1,200 for a 1-bedroom apartment, and her salary of being a restaurant worker, she couldn't afford it. So she lived with me for some time. And my dad, when he was in poor health, I was his caregiver for some time. And thinking of options on what we could do in our home, if we wanted to make changes to our home, legally we couldn't. So, having these options would be so helpful for our community in different situations that we find ourselves to continue living here and allowing people to age in place for our current residents and people that are younger and want to come back and live in Batavia, as has been mentioned here. And a mix of different housing also leads to a more diverse and vibrant community, leading back to the strategic plan. So I support these initiatives, if that's what we want to call them, because it would also support more walkability, like it has been mentioned, and we're trying to do that. We're trying to be a community that's more affordable, more accessible with our bike ped plan, and it just makes sense. It makes sense that we would go in this direction step by step, having multiple discussions, targeting the ones that we want to touch base on. I wanted to share my thoughts on that.
Just one last comment, and I'm done, but I mean, I'll just make comment that I think everyone has a story. I mean, I clawed tooth and nail to get into this town. Couldn't believe I found the house I did and fought like hell to get it. And again, barely got in, right? It's a tough town to get into. I'm not saying that's a good thing. I'm saying that's just a reality of what we're living in. And the times have changed a little bit. I mean, I got super lucky. August of 20, right? I mean, it was a couple months later in the I wouldn't be in the town. So a lot of this is external stuff that is no fault of Batavia. And I actually do agree with, a potential, like, I don't know why someone couldn't bring it to us like, hey, this is something I'm looking to do to my home. Yeah, we don't approve a ton of them or whatever, but to at least have the option to go do it. I don't know if that's capable today or if it's just a blanket, no, you can't do that. But, in certain areas, I'm certainly open to that. But, and maybe this is a question for the chiefs, or like, because for instance, I can't live in the town I came from. I don't know how many teachers who teach in that town can live there. How many teachers that teach in Naperville live in Naperville? How many, is this normal, right? Is an entry-level firefighter live in the town that he firefights in or she on a normal basis? Is that normal? It's a noble cause. I would love that for a little town. It's like a little movie, but is that normal? And especially for a town like ours, being on the growth trajectory that we're at, I just, again, a lot of noble causes, a lot of things. Sure, in an ideal world, I would love to see happen. I just don't know how we get there. And I, at this point, don't know why we continue to have the discussion without more detail moving forward. Because mostly what I hear is want. And there's just really there's no bite to the bark. There's nothing to it. And we've discussed this since I've been on council for 3 years. So I love some of the ideas, the end path. It's just, how do we get there? What does that look like? We've talked about the developers and things like that. And I just come to the conclusion, a lot of this. Now, I do agree with Kevin. There's some things we can do in zoning and creative ways that as a city, we can incentivize folks. I fully want to dive into that more. But, this idea of Batavia being affordable is out of reach right now until we can, we kind of blow up to the point where we can then create these pockets, and we can afford it and absorb it and, everything's good. But, we have a lot on our plate from a growth perspective that we need to look at. And yeah, I just don't know if this is the right path for our brains right now. We need to spend this time talking about other things, in my opinion.
One of the things I wanted to bring up from personal experience, I have one child that lives in Chicago now in literally one bedroom, and I think is $850. And he literally has a bathroom and a bedroom. That's it. On the north end of Chinatown. Shares the 3 flat with 6 other people, I think. They split this. It's not really affordable in the restaurant world that he's in to do anything different. Very few people in Chicago can do that. I had a daughter that just left for North Carolina because they're renting a townhouse bigger than my house for less than our house payment was, and less than their payment per month was for a 795 square foot single bedroom apartment on Orchard Road in North Aurora. And that's the reality of the area that we're in. I have one child that stayed home, has put away money the entire time, has other assistants, and Thursday closed on a house 3 blocks away on Main Street. And that is, one of the only things that doesn't happen unless you have contacts or know before it hits the market, because anything in that price range is gone. There was one we looked at further down on Main Street. It sold for $279, I think. It's back on the market 6 months later for $420. And it's probably going to get sold for that. The realistic thing that happens every day, the reality here is we can try to do everything we want, and the market's going to drive almost all the sales. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't do stuff, that we shouldn't forever. The entire time I've been on city council, and, I was an example, I left Batavia and lived in Geneva for 2 years. Wasn't happy about it, didn't do anything else up there. But I was able to afford to live in an apartment, an old apartment complex in the middle of Pepper Valley. And that was literally around here the only thing I could afford at the time. And then when I bought a house in Batavia, I only paid, I think, $200 more a month in my house payment than what I was paying up there. It blows my mind every time I hear somebody talk about, oh yeah, my kid's in an apartment downtown Chicago and they're paying $3,400 a month for a 2-bedroom apartment. Doesn't face the lake, but it's ridiculous. And I think we have to be realistic, but we also have to be able to allow people to do things where it makes sense. Would I want to turn my house into a duplex? No. I know none of my neighbors would be okay with that. Now, if I lived back where I lived before on Mallory, half of the houses within 5 blocks of me were 2 units, all the way down Main Street. I venture to say at some point, half of those houses were 2 units. Some of them still are. So there are places where it can work. I just don't think we can blanket, an entire city with a change like that. So I think there's lots of possibilities, and, it's going to take time and it's going to take effort. The biggest thing I see is talk to friends of mine that have done building. Guy that built my house, still in town, still doing renovations, still building new houses. He will not build anything else but a single unit house. I have another acquaintance that has done stuff from here to Elgin. He does subsidized stuff up in Elgin because he can still make money on it. If he does it in Batavia, almost everything he has done, except for one older house renovation, one big addition to an older house, everything else is all 2 unit. And when they're 2 units, they're $300,000 to $400,000 a unit, where there was maybe a dilapidated old house that was a 2 unit, so we can legally do that on the property. It's a very interesting market to try to, draw somebody into. I don't see somebody come in and saying, I want to build 100 apartment units without them being somewhat subsidized by the city, and they're going to be anything but market rate or below. They'll all be above, because that's the only way they're going to do it. They want profit. Your Honor,
But yeah, I'll go real quick here. I think what I'm hearing here is that we all kind of agree there's a problem. We're kind of circling around how much role we have in that. I don't share the sort of the deterministic attitude of it. I do think there are some small things we can do to move the thing. I don't want to dive into that. Just another aspect I'd like to just throw on the table there is we mentioned previously that new legislation has passed regarding transit nodes, passed on Halloween. So just a couple of days ago.
4:30 in the morning?
I think it was, right? I don't have an update on what that means, what all was included in that. It originally was a bicycles don't have to stop at stop signs bill, and it is now a total restructuring of the transit authority, and bicycles not stopping at stop signs is not in there anymore, right? So
Or sales tax we don't have control of.
yeah. So we are close to Geneva and the train station, but the way I read that bill, I don't think we would. I think we're too far out. But I would just sort of love some point down the line, kind of get a primer on all that. The name of the bill is People Over Parking Act. So parking is a big part of that, but I don't know. An update. That's all I'd have to say there.
I know you've had your hand up a few times.
Yeah, I've got a series of thoughts.
Okay.
I'll try and be brief. Oops.
Yeah, make sure we get it so that way it gets on the recording, and then the rebroadcast people want to watch, they can hear you.
I'll start out with the act that you're talking about. Yeah, we're aware of that. It does apply to properties within a half a mile of a transit station or an eighth of a mile of a bus route that has service that is 15 minutes or less. So it will not directly apply to us, but it is going to apply to pretty much every downtown that's up and down any of the train lines. So that is something that's going to,
When you say it's 15 minutes, I mean the bus ride from.
No, the frequency less than 15 minutes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so pretty frequent bus
So
service.
we don't have that yet.
Exactly, right.
Going to get smaller buses running more often.
Then it's less and less profitable, and it costs us more and more in tax money to send them more.
So addressing kind of a series, I kind of wrote this down, so it's kind of a stream of consciousness thing, but affordability, we did a plan with the other Tri-Cities in North Aurora a few years back. There was a housing study. I can certainly give you copies of it. I think we still have enough copies to give everybody because they gave us a box of 100 of them, and I think we still have 50 left to go or something like that. It's dated. It's 13, 14-year-old plan now, but it's still relevant for some of the things that talk about missing middle and things that we were missing, in community, based on the housing study they did. I can't remember the exact numbers, but back then the affordable single-family residence was like $168,000, and rent was like around $900, I think. And it also depended on the income levels and number of bedrooms and things like that. So that's kind of what the baseline you're looking at. Obviously, that number is going to be a little higher now. IDA does a study every few years to say, okay, you do or do not have to provide an affordable housing plan. We've been exempt from that because I think the last study that I saw, I think it was like 35% affordable housing was actually much higher than it had been in the past. So, so we don't have to do an affordable housing plan under IDA, but that's out there. We are aware of the Fox River Valley Initiative. We have had some conversations with them already about some of the interest they have in the community and things that they'd like to do. So we've shared some ideas with them. We do have the 400 South River project, which is the residences at River Point, I think is what the name of it is. Correct. Okay. And that's at 400 South River. That has made their final submittals, so that is in process. We will be, we're in the middle of reviewing that, and then it'll be in front of, Plan Commission at some point in the not too distant future. So that is an affordable housing project. We also have the RFP for the Larson Becker East Side parcel. So as part of the downtown plan and trying to, bring more housing in, we had talked about this before about targeting that site first and then working on some of the other ones. The delay was trying to get this plaza, that we've been working on with the bathrooms and everything. So that created a delay so we could figure out exactly where is the parcel line and everything else. So we've issued that. We're sending it out to everybody. We've asked you all for, contacts too. So we're trying to really, get as many people interested in trying to get submittals, and we'll see what that comes out with. We're looking, ideally at a mixed use building with multifamily and commercial on the ground floor, but again, it's going to depend on, what we actually get out of that. We also have the other project that's on South Batavia Avenue that we've talked about with the properties that are, that are in that area. That would be another project that would not be affordable housing, but that would be a large multifamily mixed use development if that, comes to fruition. So we're hopeful that that is. We are meeting regularly about that. So that is another downtown project that we're working on. As for ADUs, we do allow them in many of our single family districts already. We call them accessory, what's the actual terminology we call them? Secondary dwellings. So, but it's the same thing. So, so we do allow them. I did talk to Alderperson Malone about it. The R1L, that's something we could do as an additional change to the zoning code to add that. We could put it on par with the other ones. We actually haven't had all that much interest, to be honest with you. We adopted the zoning code in 2010, and we had that in there for the most part by then. And I think we've only had less than a half a dozen of them. So, we really haven't had all that much interest. Part of it might be just, people that don't want it in their yards, maybe that, people that just, it's too expensive or whatever. There's all sorts of reasons, that are out there. So, but we do allow it. So, but, adding it to the R1L is something we could certainly consider. We also considered years ago rezoning certain areas to higher density zoning districts, whether it be duplex districts or multifamily or what have you. In fact, we looked at the East Wilson area, particularly the north side, because we had a lot of properties there that already were 2 and 3 unit buildings. And we did, reach out to those property owners, and the majority of them said, no, we don't want it. Now, just because they said that doesn't mean we can't rezone it anyway. Mm-hmm. But, that's something we can look at because we have a lot of areas that are, near our DMU district, which would be candidates for, creating denser zoning districts, whether it's high density residential, single family residential, or making them into duplex or multifamily districts. That happens all the time with, communities as the downtowns continue to grow and change. We can certainly look at that. That would be an option for us to consider. And also, talking about the minimum lot size issue, the DMU district does not have a minimum lot size requirement. So that downtown district already does have that. So we can, if somebody was, we're looking at the changes as part of the downtown plan to create some sub districts and things like that to better make it work with, single family also is among other things. And, that could be something that, would be more encouraged as part of the zoning changes that we're proposing for that. So that is already in progress that we're working on, that, we'll hopefully get to an open house in front of Plan Commission in the not too distant future. Pre-approved plans, I've heard of this, as an option before in many communities. The issue is, what do you design? You have these plans, but, do you have options? Do you have a minimum building size? Do you have a maximum building size? Because not every lot and not every building is going to fit on every lot. We have a lot of infill lots that are kind of tucked in places, or, properties that could be subdivided. We have people that live on big lots downtown, and they could easily subdivide into another lot or two. But we would have to really talk about that and how that would work and what the cost of that would be, because there's a cost, obviously, to hire an architect to make it a plan that is building code compliant with our building codes, and then we have to still look at how it would fit on the lot. How is it going to work grading wise? How is it going to work setback wise, and everything else? So that's something that we would have to talk about a little bit more. Couple other things to talk about. Rehabs, one of the downsides, we've had, a number of rehabs of existing single family homes in town. And the upside is that, it makes the building better. We have some homes that were not maintained and everything else. The downside is it makes them more expensive, because a lot of times they are just making them more expensive and reselling it to somebody who wants to buy a nice house. I can, cite, certain builders or whatever. I'm not going to do that here, but there are times when they do that and they're not making them affordable. So that then takes that out of the affordable housing stock. When we get the new developments like Wyndham or Winding Creek and Ashton Ridge, they're building expensive homes. They're building them relatively small on small lots. And that is catering to a certain group of people, move up people, and the upside of that is that then vacates other homes that people can then move into, families, and make it more affordable in theory. But that is one way where we can preserve that. But if people are rehabbing them, making those homes more expensive, that also removes some of that from the housing stock. So that's the downside. The other problem is that developers a lot of times are scarce now, because a lot of people got out of the building industry. They decided that when the recession happened, I can't make it go of this. I'm going to go into computing, or I'm going to go into, some other business that is easier to deal with. I know of several people that have done that, and they're just like, yeah, as much as I love building, I can't make a living out of it because it's too expensive or too hard to do now. So there's, a number of people have done that. Geneva has seen a few projects near their downtown. I can tell you that none of those are affordable houses. There's one block that's just been, leveled just north of downtown that's next to another townhouse project that I think those townhomes were retailing for about $1 million a piece. St. Charles has another project on the south end of their town, and those are going to be $1.9 million a piece, and that's right by their downtown. And so, what we're seeing is that some of these things that are even downtown, and those are townhouses. And that's what unfortunately is happening, that even the downtown stuff is super expensive. The tenant protection issue, we are working on an expansion to the rental dwelling program. Right now, we require anything that's a 10-unit or greater building to be under our licensing program. We do inspections, we do a licensing program and everything else. 6? I'm sorry, so it was 10 and we made it 6. I apologize. But we are looking at making that all rental dwellings, including single family, because of issues we've had and complaints and things like that. There are costs with that as well, because we would probably have to hire additional staff to cover that. We've talked about certain types of incentive programs where if you have a good landlord who's passed their inspections over a number of years, maybe they don't have to be inspected every year, maybe it's every 3 years, that type of thing. So that is something that we are working on. It's just trying to work out the details of that and how that would work is there. And then lastly, the single stair thing, we do allow single stairs in some of our smaller buildings, and I don't remember what the threshold was, but it's like 2, maybe 3 stories at most, I think, is where we may allow those. And I think there's a limit on the number of dwelling units. But we would, I think, have some real serious concerns about the safety of implementing something like that. I know it sounds great, but when you're trying to get down a building that's 6 stories and the firemen are trying to get up that same stairway, it's a scary prospect, and I'm not sure that is a safe thing to do. And I know that there's studies that say that, but I've also seen where there's a video that a guy talked about that, and he was pointing out this building, and at the same time it's a single stair building, but it has a fire escape on the outside. Didn't look great on the outside, but that was their second exit. So that's how they managed that. So that's all I had. So, I just wanted to, throw a couple of thoughts in here for discussion, and obviously, so.
Yeah, I've enjoyed the conversation. I just would like to throw a couple of at the moment realities that we have in Batavia. Today, I talked earlier in the council meeting about the gentleman that was down here talking about how he enjoyed the Batavia football broadcast on TV. And he was moving to Batavia, and he told me he had paid over $400,000 for one of the new townhomes on the Furnace Electric property. And he couldn't wait to get moved into it because it's ideal for him because he's going to be a big sports fan at Batavia High School, and he can walk to that. And then he's got some younger grandchildren that he has to look after, and they're going to go to HC Storm School, which is right to the north of it. So he says, this is an ideal place. I was happy to pay the amount of money I paid for that particular piece of property. So that's the kind of thing you get. The other thing I would just share with you is when you leave here today, if you go up Houston Street 2 blocks and go to the top of the hill, turn right and go in the first block on North Batavia Avenue, and there's a for sale sign in front of an older house there. I think it's probably at least 75 plus years of age. I looked at the MLS listing today. What do you think that house is priced at? $500,000 plus. And supposedly they're getting all kinds of interest. So the market kind of dictates itself, and to think that you're going to do something that's going to bring the prices down, I'm not convinced that that's it. You guys have done a great job here, and we're in a pretty good town, and a lot of people want to get into. And there's a lot of reasons why they want to get into it to go beyond the price of the house. But that's certainly one of the key factors. But there's a lot of reasons they're willing to pay for that price of that house because there's some other nice amenities that are there.
Abby, go ahead.
So I don't know if we're ready to wrap up, but I would at least put it out there that if another alderperson or two would join me, I'd love to have 3 conversations in the future about expanding the ADU zoning, the triplex and duplex by right or by condition for certain zoning districts, and then the pre-approved plans. I know there are example ordinances out there, so I'm not expecting staff to draft something original, but if we could have just an example posted to the memo so that we could see what one might look like. And then I also wanted to make sure that we got public comment because I know people had their hands up in the audience.
Anybody else over here on this side? Kevin?
Just saying I would join that, and I think pre-approved plans, and I think ADUs are a great place to start with pre-approved plans.
Point as well.
Okay. We can schedule those out so that way we can get through them and spend dedicated time just on single issues so that we can work through more of that. Okay, public, if you'd like to make comment, come up. All we need is your name and you can have a few minutes.
Yeah, sorry, I know it's late. Ms. Perry Helmer, I'm a resident of Batavia since 2017, over by Louise White School. Mr. Mayor, Dave Sebastian told me to say hi to you. Especially when he gets annoyed, so. I wanted to offer a bit of a strange perspective. I think I'm the only person in the state that moved from Texas to Illinois in the last 30 years. I grew up in Round Rock, Texas, which in the period from 2010 to today has experienced about an entire population of Batavia moving to it. Texas has all of the same market forces, interest rates, financing available that we do. The city of Round Rock has an obtusely long zoning code, but is able to build tens of thousands of units every year. And it's a place where teachers and firefighters and young professionals in all sorts of trades can work. My neighbor, when you said something earlier about a fantasy of having a multiple socioeconomic classes living in a neighborhood. My next door neighbor moved furniture. Down the street, the guy's a painter. That fantasy existed here in Batavia up until about 2015. And it's not inevitable, this crisis, which we've done studies going back to 2013. The city added about 33 units a year from 2010 to 2023. Where we are today with, I mean, as of 7 p.m., the median price in Batavia is $450,000. Under the traditional definition of affordability, that is a household income of $102,000. The median household income is $83,000. I think one of the things that's happened over the last maybe 15 years is affordability used to mean subsidized housing for very low income individuals. I think what it means today for a lot of the folks here that are talking is housing that young professionals, social workers, entry-level folks all across different incomes can afford without subsidy, but the market is not meeting that need. So to me, we talked about renting and duplexes, and the frightening thing to me as a resident of the city is the sclerotic complacency. And that's why I've been lurking in the back of city council meetings for a few months. I've bought a old crappy home, been renovating it for years, and it will never end. Like many have mentioned, because that was my entry point into this market. But like many have also mentioned, my teacher at St. Charles North, and he had a second child, couldn't afford to hire an architect to go through multiple rounds of revisions with the city to do an addition to his house, and he now lives in a different town. I think the town, his wife did some art here at Water Street, and they're having to commute all the way out to Genoa, where they were able to find an affordable house. I think our community would be better and more vibrant with them in it. And part of the reason why I chose Batavia in 2017 was because of the fact that there were some legacy multifamily units in a gridded arrangement where I could walk to amenities. Where I grew up in Round Rock, that wasn't possible. It was curving cul-de-sacs, and it's a great place to grow up as a kid, but it gets, for some folks, more difficult when you're an adult and want to do more than ride your bike to Walgreens. So I just wanted to offer that as perhaps motivation to say, I think that, yeah, the problems are national. The market forces are above anybody, in this metro region to be able to handle. But I would implore council and city staff to throw the kitchen sink at it, because it is a crisis. And, I remember when we were discussing one of the developments downtown, you implored staff, why aren't we building? Why aren't we building? And, like I said, 33 houses. I was down in Austin last week, building with Habitat for Humanity, and we put up 25 houses in 1 week. That's roughly the annual production we did for 20 years. So as we face some big forces, doesn't mean there are other communities out there that have the same headwinds, and they have different outcomes. So I just wanted to bring that perspective.
Real quick before you leave, there's some, I don't know if that's your wallet laying on the floor or something I just noticed out there. Make sure you don't leave without that. Anybody else want to come up? Any other comments? Okay.
Hello, my name is Ashlyn. I work professionally in the affordable housing and just housing development in general, and just glad to be here and hear the conversation today. Something that we've seen really, kind of adding to the conversation from we identify a challenge side, and then also something that is a consistent tactical, not potentially removable or mitigatable roadblock that we run into. We see construction costs just going through the roof, which makes it really hard to really meet some of the housing needs in communities. We're based here in DuPage County, just on the other side, but meeting housing needs in the Chicagoland area where there is a gap where rents for affordable housing will be, and there will be heavy capital investment that comes with that can sustain the project on less rent. And then without any of those supports, those rents, market rate housing would be what I would need to charge as a rent without any effectively debt-free capitalization of the project and just the enormous dearth gap between them. Something we were working on in Elburn recently was a fairly similar market to here, subsidized at $1,300 a month, but without any subsidy going up to $2,700 a month for rents. But just seeing that, and then adding something that we consistently see as a challenge in developing and moving into communities and trying to make projects become a reality are some of the timing of costs and risks as they pertain to assembling the capital stack. So something that becomes a decision factor for us more often than not is looking at when we are looking to apply to state or federal or other funding sources, what documentation we need to have in line for those and our likelihood of getting awarded, and then going back to the municipal zoning process and amendment process as needed if we need to do a PUD or a plat of subdivision or even something as small as a rezoning, but particularly with the bigger ones, just weighing mentally those processes of if we're going to do a plat of subdivision and it's only good for so long and we need to have a civil engineer and a traffic engineer add pieces to it, it's sometimes really hard to get the whole company on board in that $60,000 or $70,000 investment until we have funding in the bag, and just aligning those timelines is a real tangible challenge we face. Thank you.
Hey, does anybody else have anything? Scott?
So based on the summary, we'll put together some timelines for each of these three things we talked about and bring these back to council and put a more formal memo with them, as well as some whether other thoughts or recommendations and what have you, as part of that. So.
Okay, random question, not directly tied to this, but when we were at the strategic planning retreat and we were talking, or maybe it was here, about some sort of mechanism for us to share documents amongst ourselves in an open forum, online open forum. I don't know if any progress was made on that. I have my own spreadsheet with lots of tables of where this has been done, examples, the different conditions, all the discrepancies, how much it's cost, what the results have been for a lot of these different things, and everywhere where I've been keeping my notes. I'm happy to share that with everyone, and I don't want to get in trouble. How do I do that?
You can share it with anybody anytime.
I know, but I also
we just
love
can't respond to it.
I know. If there was an open way to do that online that we all could add notes to it, I love collaborative documents.
That's beyond me, but I guess there's some FOIA questions and
Yeah,
all that.
I think that's what we came down to.
Yeah, like
Everybody had their own about editing.
to that point, like if we created a Google Doc and 5 of you were in there editing at the same time, that would probably be considered a meeting under the Open Meetings Act. So the best way generally, if you do want to share information around as a group, either, remember you can have conversations to try to keep them, bilateral, 2 people discussing it. And then if you do want to have a further conversation, we do things like this as a group and put it on a city council agenda. So the short answer, the best way to get that information across is probably either just send it around to your peers, or, we as staff can set it around and go from there. But anytime you kind of create a shared drive with multiple people accessing it, you run the risk of Open Meetings Act violations, especially if they're policy or those types of discussions.
I think we could share it as information going with each one of the subjects, the information that you have or anybody else has, that we could put that into like a memo form to come out with, with the meeting agenda. So that way we have that ahead of time. And then if there are questions, people can ask those or put those out there. And then from one place, we get an answer for that, not back and forth between 4 or 5 of us. So we don't have an Open Meetings Act issue.
I will also add, if you come across like any interesting news articles or otherwise, I do put some at the bottom of the weekly update every week, and I try to keep an eye out for things that might pique your interest. So if you do come across something, you can always send it to me, and I can get it around to your peers that way as well.
Else?
Just to clarify what I'm hearing, so if I wanted to share a document, I could share it peer-to-peer, so I could share with Robin, with Tim, Abby.
You can share it with all of us.
One-on-one.
We just can't respond and have a discussion back and forth.
Right.
So the reply all, forget that.
Right, right. But
And if everybody remembers that, then we're okay.
But individually. What's that? What did you say?
I don't think so. I think we can just use the all.
Yeah.
As long as we don't respond and have conversations back and forth on it, then it meets the Open Meeting Act standard.
So I'm asking a different question. I'm asking, can I talk to Robin about it and, have a conversation with her and then separately talk to Tim about it and separately talk to Abby? So I'm talking to every single person in a separate conversations and they all see my notes,
Right.
but, one-on-one. That's okay.
Right, that is okay.
Okay. Right.
Up to 4 people at a time with the size of our council. Which I think is good, because then we share the information that you have gotten, and then all of us get to see it. I mean, to me, that's what we should do, especially on policy decisions like this. If we operate in a vacuum and you've got 8 hours of research that you've talked to 5 people about, but the rest of us don't know about it, that doesn't help us make a decision in the end. At least in my mind, it's better if we all get to see that. And then we come to a meeting like this and we can all talk about it and then it's all legal. And if Roman was sitting here, he would say yes.
We hope so.
Yeah, as long as we do stuff in open session like that, there's no problem with it. Okay, and staff has direction and we'll come up with times to bring that up, and then everybody that wants to have stuff go into each one of those, make sure we get that into staff so that it can come out in a memo and attach to it. That to me is the easiest way to do it. And again, nobody can stop us from having one-on-one conversations. So
Yeah,
remember that.
If you could make sure staff is looped in on it, just so we can know, what everything is being said and everything else, so we can know, have an understanding of, maybe there's information we're not aware of too, so it would help. Thanks.
Now, since I don't have a printed agenda, I think that's all we have. Or are we going to do an executive session? We need to have those. Okay. Give me 1 second. You don't need to do a project status or other business. Then we will go into executive session for land acquisition and sale and purchase of electricity. Motion by Lancy. Second by Malay. All those in favor?
Aye.